Canine dog interrupts baby's funeral. What he was digging beneath the coffin made everyone gasp. What happened at this funeral will shock you to your core. A trained police dog's instincts uncovered a truth so devastating that it changed everything everyone thought they knew about death, loss, and the power of loyalty. Before we begin this story that will leave you speechless, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from around the world. The morning sky hung heavy with gray clouds over Willowbrook Cemetery, as if nature itself was mourning, alongside the small gathering of people dressed in black. Rain had threatened all morning but held back, leaving the air thick and humid. The freshly dug grave sat like an open wound in the earth, surrounded by wilted flowers and the overwhelming scent of wet soil mixed with grief. Maya Rodriguez clutched a crumpled tissue in one hand and her sister Carmen's arm with the other, her legs barely able to support her weight. Her 5-year-old son Ethan's small white coffin sat suspended over the grave, decorated with toy cars and superhero stickers that looked heartbreakingly out of place against the somber setting. Maya's dark eyes were swollen from days of crying, and her voice had been reduced to barely a whisper since the house fire that took her little boy 3 days ago. "Mommy always said you were the bravest superhero," Maya whispered toward the coffin, her words catching in her throat. "My sweet angel, my little Superman." The small crowd of maybe 30 people stood in respectful silence. Neighbors, co-workers, and a few family members who had traveled from out of state formed a loose circle around the grave. Among them stood Officer Jake Mitchell, a tall man in his early 40s with kind eyes and calloused hands that had seen too much tragedy in his 15 years on the force. Jake had been the first responder to the house fire, and though he barely knew Maya before that terrible night, something about her story had stayed with him. Next to Jake sat his partner of 3 years, a German shepherd named Rex. The dog was a retired bomb detection specialist who now worked search and rescue operations. Rex had thick black and tan fur, intelligent brown eyes, and a reputation for being completely unshakable in any situation. He had found missing children, detected explosives, and never once failed to follow his training. Today he sat perfectly still beside Jake, wearing his official canine vest out of respect for the occasion. Father Martinez, a gentleman in his 60s with silver hair and weathered hands, opened his small prayer book and began speaking in a soft, measured voice. "We gather today not just to say goodbye to young Ethan Rodriguez, but to celebrate the joy he brought into this world during his short but beautiful life." Maya's sobs grew louder. Carmen wrapped her arm tighter around her sister's shoulders and whispered, "He's with the angels now, Maya. He's safe." But as Father Martinez continued his eulogy, something strange began to happen. Rex, who had been sitting calmly throughout the entire service, suddenly lifted his head and tilted it to one side. His ears perked forward, and his nostrils flared as if he had caught a scent that didn't belong. Jake noticed immediately. In 3 years of working together, he had learned to read every one of Rex's signals. The dog's behavior was subtle but unmistakable. Something was wrong. "Rex," Jake whispered softly, placing a gentle hand on the dog's head. "Easy, boy." But Rex didn't settle. Instead, he stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on something near the grave. His tail wasn't wagging, and his posture had shifted from relaxed to alert. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Rex only acted this way when he detected something significant. Father Martinez paused in his prayer, noticing the disturbance. A few people turned to look at the dog, their faces showing mild annoyance. This was supposed to be a solemn moment, a final goodbye to an innocent child. "Officer Mitchell," whispered Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor who had helped Maya with babysitting over the years. "Could you please control your dog? This isn't the time or place." Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment, but something in Rex's behavior kept him from immediately pulling the dog away. Rex had never given a false alert, not once, and the way he was staring at the ground near the coffin sent warning signals through Jake's trained instincts. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly to the group. "Just give me a moment." Rex took a step forward, then another. His nose was working overtime, and his entire body language had shifted into what Jake recognized as detection mode. The dog was following a scent trail that led directly toward the gravesite. Maya looked up through her tears, her face twisted with confusion and pain. "What's wrong with him? Why is he doing this during my baby's funeral?" Carmen's grip tightened on Maya's arm. "Maybe we should ask them to leave, Maya. You don't need this right now." But Jake was watching Rex with the focus of someone whose life had depended on trusting his partner's instincts. The dog moved closer to the grave, his nose low to the ground. He circled the area once, twice, then stopped directly beside the mound of freshly turned earth that would soon cover Ethan's coffin. Rex let out a low, barely audible whine. Then he looked directly at Jake with an expression that seemed to say, "Something's here, something important." Father Martinez cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we could continue the service and address this afterwards." Jake nodded and gently tugged on Rex's leash. "Come on, boy, let's move back." But Rex planted his feet and refused to budge. This was completely unlike him. In all their time together, Rex had never disobeyed a direct command during an inappropriate situation. The dog's training was absolute, his discipline legendary among the canine unit. "I don't understand," Jake muttered under his breath. "What are you trying to tell me?" The crowd was growing restless. People shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. This was supposed to be a time for grief and closure, not confusion and disruption. Maya's voice rose above the murmurs, cracked with exhaustion and pain. "Please, just make him stop. I can't take any more today. My heart is already broken." Jake felt torn between his respect for the grieving mother and his growing certainty that Rex was trying to communicate something vital. He had seen the dog work crime scenes, disaster sites, and missing person cases. Rex's behavior was never random, never without purpose. The dog suddenly let out a sharp bark that echoed across the cemetery, causing several people to jump. Then he did something that made Jake's blood run cold. Rex began pawing at the dirt near the edge of the grave, his claws scratching against the earth, with urgent, deliberate movements. "That's enough," Carmen said firmly, stepping forward. "Officer, you need to remove your dog immediately. This is completely inappropriate." But Jake found himself frozen, watching Rex work. The dog wasn't randomly digging. His movements were precise, focused on one specific spot about 2 feet from where the coffin would be lowered. Rex's entire body was trembling with excitement or urgency, and he kept looking back at Jake as if pleading for permission to continue. "Jake," Father Martinez said softly, using the officer's first name with the familiarity of someone who had seen him at other crime scenes and accidents. "What's going on here?" Jake honestly didn't know how to answer. In 15 years of police work, he had learned to trust his instincts almost as much as he trusted Rex's. And right now, every instinct he had was screaming that something was terribly wrong with this entire situation. Rex continued digging, his paws moving faster now. Small clods of earth flew behind him as he worked. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to be angry, curious, or afraid. Then, just as Jake was about to pull Rex away by force, the dog's paw struck something that wasn't dirt. Something solid, something that made a distinct metallic sound when Rex's claw scraped against it. Rex immediately stopped digging and sat back on his haunches, looking directly at Jake with an expression of complete certainty. His tail gave one small wag, the signal he always used when he had successfully located what he was searching for. Jake felt his heart start pounding. "What did you find, boy?" He knelt down beside Rex and carefully brushed away the loose dirt the dog had displaced. There, partially buried in the earth, was the corner of what appeared to be a small metal box. It was maybe 6 inches square, made of stainless steel, and completely out of place in a cemetery gravesite. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even Maya's crying had stopped, as everyone stared at the strange object Rex had uncovered. Jake looked up at Father Martinez, then at Maya, then back at the metal box. His mind was racing through possibilities, none of them good. Why would there be a buried metal container next to a child's grave? Who put it there, and when? "Maya," Jake said carefully, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Did you or anyone in your family bury anything here? Maybe something personal to remember Ethan by?" Maya shook her head slowly, her eyes wide with confusion and growing fear. "No, nothing. We weren't allowed to put anything in the ground until after the service. The funeral home was very clear about that." Carmen stepped closer, her protective instincts kicking in. "What is that thing? Why was it buried there?" Jake didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about procedure, about evidence preservation, about the possibility that this innocent funeral had just become something much more complicated. Rex remained sitting beside the partially uncovered box, calm now that he had completed his task. His dark eyes moved between Jake and the metal container, waiting for his partner to understand what he had found. Father Martinez approached cautiously. "Officer Mitchell, should we continue with the service? This is highly unusual, and I'm not sure what the proper protocol is." Jake stood up slowly, his mind racing. Every instinct told him that this metal box didn't belong here, that its presence was somehow connected to something larger and more dangerous than a simple burial mistake. "I think," Jake said carefully, looking at Maya's tear-streaked face, "we need to stop the service for a few minutes while I figure out what this is." Maya's voice rose to a near scream. "No! I just want to bury my son. I just want this nightmare to be over. Why can't you just leave us alone?" Carmen put both arms around Maya, trying to calm her down. "It's okay, Maya. We'll figure this out. Maybe it's just some old pipe or something the groundskeepers buried years ago." But Jake was already pulling out his phone. Something about this situation felt wrong on a level he couldn't explain. Rex's behavior, the timing of the discovery, the fact that the metal box appeared to have been recently buried rather than sitting in the ground for years. He dialed the number for his sergeant. "Sarge, it's Mitchell. I'm at a funeral service at Willowbrook Cemetery, and my K9 just uncovered something unusual. I think I need a detective and maybe the crime scene unit out here." Maya's legs gave out, and she collapsed into Carmen's arms. "Crime scene? What are you talking about? This is my baby's funeral. Why are you doing this to me?" Jake felt sick to his stomach as he watched the grieving mother break down again. Part of him wanted to simply rebury the metal box and let the funeral continue, but his training and experience told him that ignoring Rex's alert could be the biggest mistake of his career. "Maya," he said gently, kneeling down beside her, "I know this is the worst possible timing, but Rex has never been wrong about something like this. If he found something here, there's a reason. I need to make sure everyone's safe." Through her tears, Maya looked up at him with eyes full of pain and confusion. "Safe from what? It's a funeral. My baby is dead. What could possibly be dangerous about burying my son?" Jake wished he had an answer. All he knew was that Rex had detected something significant enough to break his own training and disrupt a funeral service. In 3 years of partnership, that had never happened. As they waited for backup to arrive, Jake kept his eyes on the partially uncovered metal box. It was small enough to hold documents, maybe some personal items, but something about its placement and the way Rex had reacted suggested it contained something much more important than keepsakes. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting strange shadows across the cemetery. Maya sat on the ground beside her sister, staring at her son's coffin and wondering why the worst day of her life had somehow managed to get even worse. Rex remained at attention beside the metal box, his job done but his instincts still sharp. Something about this entire situation didn't add up, and both the dog and his partner could sense it. Jake had no idea that within the next hour, everything he thought he knew about Ethan Rodriguez's death was about to be turned completely upside down. 20 minutes later, Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the cemetery in an unmarked sedan, followed closely by a crime scene van. Jake had worked with Sarah on several cases before and respected her thorough approach to investigations. She was a petite woman in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an ability to spot inconsistencies that others missed. Sarah stepped out of her car and surveyed the scene. The funeral guests had moved back from the gravesite but refused to leave entirely. Most stood in small groups, whispering among themselves and shooting confused glances toward Maya, who remained seated on the ground with Carmen's arms wrapped around her. "Mitchell," Sarah said, approaching Jake with her notebook already in hand, "what exactly are we dealing with here?" Jake gestured toward Rex, who still sat beside the partially uncovered metal box like a statue. Rex alerted on something during the funeral service. He's never given a false positive, so I called it in. There's a metal container buried right next to where the coffin was supposed to be lowered. Sarah knelt down and examined the exposed corner of the box without touching it. "How long has it been there?" "That's what we need to find out. The grave was dug yesterday morning according to the funeral home. The dirt looks freshly disturbed around the box, like someone buried it recently." Maya's voice carried across the cemetery, weak but desperate. "Please, can someone just tell me what's happening? I buried my husband 2 years ago, and now I can't even bury my son without something going wrong. What did I do to deserve this?" Sarah's expression softened as she looked at the grieving mother. She had delivered bad news to families before, but disrupting a child's funeral felt particularly cruel. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I know this is incredibly difficult timing. We just need to make sure this object doesn't pose any safety concerns before we can continue with your son's service. Carmen helped Maya to her feet. How long is this going to take? Maya hasn't slept in 3 days. She needs to lay her baby to rest. I understand, Sarah replied. We'll work as quickly as possible. She signaled to the crime scene technician, a young man named Marcus, who had arrived with a full kit of excavation tools. Let's carefully uncover this thing and see what we're dealing with. Marcus put on latex gloves and began using a small brush to gently remove dirt from around the metal box. As more of it became visible, Jake could see that it was approximately 6 inches square and 3 inches deep, with a simple hinge lid secured by a small padlock. It's definitely been buried recently, Marcus said, examining the soil patterns around the container. This dirt was moved within the last day or two at most. And look at this. He pointed to small scratch marks on the metal surface. These look like tool marks. Someone used a screwdriver or something similar to bury this. Sarah made notes while Marcus continued his careful excavation. Within 15 minutes, the entire metal box was exposed and photographed from multiple angles. Mrs. Rodriguez, Sarah called over to Maya, I need to ask you some questions about the last few days. Is there somewhere private we can talk? Maya wiped her eyes with a tissue that had long since become useless. I don't understand why you need to question me. My son died in a house fire. The fire department investigated everything. There's nothing mysterious about it. I'm sure you're right, Sarah said gently, but I need to follow procedure when we find unexpected items at crime scenes. Crime scenes? Carmen's voice shot up an octave. This isn't a crime scene, it's a funeral. Jake stepped forward, trying to diffuse the tension. Sarah, maybe we should open the container first. If it's just someone's personal property that got buried by mistake, we can clear this up quickly. Sarah nodded and directed Marcus to carefully remove the small padlock with bolt cutters. The lock snapped easily, suggesting it wasn't meant for high security. As Marcus lifted the lid, everyone present leaned forward slightly, curiosity overcoming their discomfort with the situation. Inside the metal box, wrapped in clear plastic bags, were several items that made Sarah's blood run cold. The first item was a child's stuffed animal, a small blue elephant with burn marks along one side. The second was a white t-shirt, also burned, with what appeared to be dark stains across the front. The third item was a small USB flash drive in a sealed plastic bag. Maya saw the stuffed elephant and let out a scream that echoed across the entire cemetery. That's Mr. Bubbles! That's Ethan's elephant! He slept with it every night! How is it here? It was supposed to burn in the fire! Carmen stared at the items in shock. Maya, are you sure? Maybe it just looks similar. No! Maya was shaking now, her voice rising to near hysteria. Look at the ear! See how it's torn on the left side? Ethan tore it when he was 3 years old. That's definitely Mr. Bubbles. But it was in his room when the fire started. It should be ashes. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had handled enough child death cases to recognize evidence when she saw it. The combination of personal items, burn damage, and suspicious burial suggested something far more sinister than a tragic accident.
Mrs. Rodriguez, I need you to step back from the gravesite. This is now officially a crime scene.
Maya's legs gave out again, and she collapsed onto the grass. Crime scene? What are you saying? Are you saying someone killed my baby? Jake helped Marcus secure the evidence while Sarah tried to process the implications. If the child's personal belongings were buried separately from his body, it suggested that someone had accessed them after the fire, but before the funeral. That meant either the fire scene hadn't been properly processed, or someone with access to the evidence had planted these items. Father Martinez approached Sarah cautiously. Detective, what should I tell the other families? We have 2 more services scheduled for this afternoon. Cancel them, Sarah said firmly. This entire section of the cemetery needs to be sealed off until we can determine what we're dealing with. She pulled out her phone and dialed the fire marshal's office. This is Detective Chen with the police department. I need to speak with whoever investigated the Rodriguez house fire 3 days ago. We may have a problem. While Sarah made her calls, Jake knelt down beside Maya, who was now rocking back and forth on the ground. Maya, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to ask you some specific questions about the fire and about Ethan. Can you help us understand what happened that night? Maya looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold more pain than any person should be able to bear. I told everyone what happened. I told the fire department, the insurance company, the funeral home. Ethan was sleeping in his room when the fire started. I tried to get to him, but the hallway was already full of smoke. The firefighters found his body in his bed. Who identified the body? Sarah asked, having finished her phone calls. I couldn't. I was in the hospital for smoke inhalation. Carmen identified him at the morgue. Carmen nodded, tears streaming down her face. It was horrible. He was so burned that I could barely recognize him. But it was definitely Ethan. I would know my nephew anywhere. Sarah exchanged glances with Jake. Something about this story wasn't adding up. If the body was burned beyond easy recognition, how could they be certain of the identification? And why were the child's personal belongings buried separately at the cemetery? Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to ask you something that might sound strange. Has anyone been acting unusually toward you or Ethan in the past few weeks? Any disputes with neighbors, problems with ex-boyfriends, custody issues? Maya's face went pale. Why would you ask that? Do you think someone started the fire on purpose? I'm just trying to understand all the possibilities, Sarah said gently. Carmen shifted uncomfortably. Maya, maybe you should tell them about Derek. Derek? Maya shook her head violently. No, Derek wouldn't hurt Ethan. He loved Ethan. Who is Derek? Jake asked. Maya hesitated, looking between her sister and the detective. Derek Hoffman. He was my boyfriend for about 2 years. We broke up 6 months ago, but he's been trying to get back together ever since. Did he have access to your house? Sarah asked. He had a key, but I asked for it back when we broke up. He said he gave it back, but Maya trailed off, a look of realization crossing her face. But what? Jake prompted. The fire started in the kitchen. The fire marshal said it was an electrical problem with the stove, but I always unplug everything before bed. It's a habit I've had since I was a kid. And that night, I remember specifically unplugging the coffee maker and the toaster. Sarah made more notes. Tell me about Derek. What does he do for work? He's a volunteer firefighter with the West Side Station. He's been doing it for about 5 years. He knows a lot about fire safety and prevention. Jake and Sarah exchanged another look. A volunteer firefighter would know exactly how to start a fire that looked accidental. He would also have access to information about fire department procedures and response times. Maya, Sarah said carefully, when was the last time you saw Derek? At the hospital. He came to visit me while I was being treated for smoke inhalation. He seemed really upset about Ethan. He kept saying he was sorry, that he should have been there to protect us. Marcus finished photographing the evidence and carefully packed everything into evidence bags. Detective, there's something else you should see. He pointed to the bottom of the metal box, where a small piece of paper had been taped to the interior. Sarah used tweezers to carefully remove it and unfold it. Written in block letters were the words, "The truth is not buried with the dead." Maya saw the paper and screamed again. What does that mean? What truth? My baby is dead. What truth could there possibly be? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was definitely not a random burial of lost property. Someone had deliberately planted evidence at this funeral site, and they had included a message that suggested the official story of Ethan's death was false. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to be completely honest with you. Based on what we've found here today, I believe your son's death may not have been an accident. We're going to need to reopen the investigation into the fire, and we're going to need to examine the body to confirm identification. Maya's world seemed to collapse around her. Examine the body? You mean dig up my baby? I can't handle this. First I lose my son, now you're telling me someone might have killed him? Carmen wrapped her arms around Maya again. This has to be some kind of mistake. Derek might be pushy about getting back together, but he would never hurt a child. He was good to Ethan. Jake was thinking about the timeline. Sarah, if this evidence was planted recently, it means someone wanted it to be found. Rex alerting on it might not have been an accident. Someone could have used a scent that would attract a police dog. You think someone wanted us to find this? Sarah asked. Think about it. A metal box buried right next to the gravesite, just deep enough to be hidden, but shallow enough to be discovered by a dog with a good nose. And the timing is perfect, right during the funeral when there would be maximum emotional impact. Maya looked up at them with a mixture of hope and terror. Are you saying someone is trying to tell us that Ethan might still be alive? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Sarah didn't want to give false hope to a grieving mother, but the evidence suggested that nothing about this case was what it appeared to be. Mrs. Rodriguez, I can't make any promises, but we're going to investigate every possibility. If there's even a chance that the official story is wrong, we need to find out the truth. Rex, who had been sitting quietly throughout the entire exchange, suddenly stood up and walked over to Maya. The dog sat down directly in front of her and placed one paw gently on her knee, looking up at her with what seemed like sympathy. Maya reached out with a shaking hand and touched Rex's head. You found this, didn't you? You knew something was wrong. Rex's tail gave a small wag, and he pressed his head against Maya's palm. Jake watched the interaction with growing certainty that his partner had saved the day. Rex has found missing children before. His instincts about people in danger are incredible. Sarah closed her notebook and signaled to Marcus to finish processing the scene. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm going to need you to come to the station to give a formal statement. And I'm going to need a complete list of everyone who had access to your house in the weeks before the fire. What about the funeral? Carmen asked. What about laying Ethan to rest? The funeral is postponed until we can confirm the identity of the remains and investigate the fire more thoroughly. Maya stood up slowly, supported by her sister's arm. Detective Chen, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you really think there's a chance my son might still be alive? Sarah looked at the evidence bags, at the cryptic message, at the perfectly timed discovery that had disrupted the funeral. Every instinct told her that this case was about to become much more complicated than anyone imagined. Mrs. Rodriguez, I've learned to never rule out any possibility until we have all the facts. Right now, we have more questions than answers, but I promise you this, we're going to find the truth, whatever it is. As the crime scene team finished their work and began packing up their equipment, Maya took one last look at her son's coffin, still suspended over the grave that would remain empty for now. Ethan, she whispered, if you're out there somewhere, Mommy is going to find you. Rex barked once, as if in agreement, and Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. In 15 years of police work, he had never encountered a case that felt more like the beginning of something huge and terrifying. What do you think really happened to Ethan? And could a mother's worst nightmare actually be hiding her greatest hope? 2 hours later, Maya sat in a sterile interview room at the police station, clutching a cup of cold coffee that she hadn't touched. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her exhausted face. Detective Chen sat across from her, with a digital recorder between them, while Jake Mitchell stood near the door with Rex lying quietly in the corner. I need you to walk me through the night of the fire one more time, Sarah said gently. I know it's painful, but sometimes details come back when we're in a calmer environment. Maya closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. I went to bed around 10:30. Ethan had been asleep since 8. I checked on him before I went to my room, like I always do. He was curled up with Mr. Bubbles, sleeping peacefully. You're absolutely certain the stuffed elephant was in his bed that night? Positive. Ethan couldn't sleep without it. He's had that elephant since he was 6 months old. Sarah made notes on her pad. What woke you up? The smoke alarm. It was so loud, and there was this smell, this horrible burning smell. I jumped out of bed and ran toward Ethan's room, but the hallway was already full of black smoke. I could barely see anything. Maya's voice cracked as she continued. I tried to get to his room, but the heat was so intense. I was coughing and choking. I could hear the sirens getting closer, and then someone grabbed me from behind and pulled me outside. Who pulled you outside? One of the firefighters. I don't remember his name. I kept screaming for Ethan, telling them my baby was still inside. They made me sit in the ambulance while they fought the fire. Jake stepped forward. Maya, did you see Derek that night, during the fire, or at the hospital? Maya nodded slowly. He showed up at the hospital maybe an hour after they brought me in. He said he heard about the fire on the radio scanner. All the volunteer firefighters monitor the emergency channels. How did he seem when he arrived? Sarah asked. Upset. Really upset. He kept asking if I was okay, if there was anything he could do. He wanted to stay with me, but I told him to leave. We weren't together anymore, and I was too devastated to deal with relationship drama on top of everything else. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Maya, I need to ask you about your relationship with Derek. When you broke up 6 months ago, how did he handle it? Maya shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Not well. He kept calling and texting, showing up at my work, leaving flowers on my doorstep. He couldn't accept that it was over. Did he ever threaten you or Ethan? Not exactly threaten, but he said things like, "You'll realize you need me," and "I'm not giving up on us." It was more persistent than threatening, but it made me uncomfortable. Jake exchanged glances with Sarah. Did Derek ever express any anger toward Ethan specifically? Maya shook her head quickly. No, never. That's why this is so hard to believe. Derek was actually really good with Ethan. He taught him how to throw a baseball, helped him with his homework. Ethan liked him. But you still broke up with him, Sarah observed. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Derek could be controlling. He wanted to know where I was all the time, who I was talking to. He didn't like me having friends or going out without him. It felt suffocating. Did he have a key to your house during the relationship? Yes, and I asked for it back when we broke up. He gave me a key, but... Maya paused, looking troubled. But what? I always wondered if he had made copies. Sometimes I would come home and feel like things had been moved around. Nothing major, just little things. A book in a different place, the coffee maker plugged in when I was sure I had unplugged it. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. How long had this been going on? The last couple of months before the fire. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid because of the stress from the breakup. Jake pulled out his phone. Sarah, I'm going to call the fire marshal and see if we can get Derek's work schedule for that night. If he was on duty, there should be records. While Jake made his call, Sarah continued questioning Maya about the weeks leading up to the fire. Did Derek know your routine, when you went to bed, when Ethan went to bed? He knew everything about our schedule. He used to live with us for about 6 months before we broke up. And he knew about your habit of unplugging appliances? Maya nodded. He used to tease me about it, called it my paranoid ritual, but I've been doing it since I was a child. My grandmother always said it prevented electrical fires. Jake finished his call and returned to the table. The fire marshal's office says Derek wasn't on the official duty roster that night, but volunteers sometimes respond to calls even when they're off duty. They're checking to see if he showed up at the scene. There's something else, Maya said quietly. The day before the fire, Derek came by my work. He wanted to talk about getting back together. When I said no, he got angry. He said I was making a mistake, that I would regret pushing him away. Did he say anything specific about protecting you and Ethan? He said that bad things happen to people who don't have anyone looking out for them. At the time, I thought he was just trying to scare me into taking him back. Sarah closed her notebook and looked directly at Maya. I need to prepare you for what happens next. We're going to bring Derek in for questioning, and we're going to need to examine your son's remains to confirm identification. Maya's face went white. You really think Derek might have... But why would he hurt Ethan? Even if he wanted to get back at me, why hurt an innocent child? People do desperate things when they feel like they're losing control, Jake said gently, and sometimes they create problems so they can be the one to solve them. Maya stared at him in confusion. What do you mean? Think about it. Derek showed up at the hospital right after the fire. He wanted to be your support system during the crisis. If he caused the fire, he could position himself as your protector and consoler. But Ethan died, Maya whispered. How does that help Derek get me back? Sarah and Jake exchanged another look. They were both thinking the same thing, but neither wanted to voice it yet. If Derek had staged Ethan's death, there was a possibility that the child was still alive somewhere. Maya, Sarah said carefully, when you identified the body at the morgue, was Carmen the only one with you? Yes, I was still in the hospital, and I couldn't handle seeing Ethan like that. Carmen said it was definitely him, and I trusted her. How well does Carmen know Derek? They have met several times, but they're not close. Carmen never really liked him. She said he was too possessive. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and felt his pulse quicken. Sarah, the fire marshal just confirmed that Derek Hoffman's personal vehicle was spotted at the fire scene that night, even though he wasn't on duty. Maya gasped. He was there, but he told me he heard about it on the radio and came to the hospital. It gets worse, Jake continued reading the message. They have security camera footage from a gas station 2 blocks from your house. Derek's truck was there at 2:17 a.m., about 20 minutes before the fire was reported. Maya stood up so quickly that her chair fell backward. Are you saying Derek started the fire? Are you saying he killed my baby? We don't know yet, Sarah said, trying to keep Maya calm. But we have enough evidence to bring him in for questioning. Maya began pacing around the small room. I can't believe this. I can't believe I trusted him around Ethan. I can't believe I let him into our lives." Rex lifted his head from where he had been lying quietly and watched Maya with alert eyes. The dog seemed to sense her distress and let out a soft whine. "Maya, sit down," Jake said gently. "We need to discuss what happens next." Maya sat back down, but she couldn't stop shaking. What if Derek hurt Ethan because of me? What if my son died because I couldn't see what kind of person Derek really was? "This is not your fault," Sarah said firmly. "If Derek did this, he's responsible for his own actions. You couldn't have known he was capable of something like this." Jake leaned forward in his chair. "Maya, I need to ask you something important. When you broke up with Derek, did he ever mention anything about making you sorry, about teaching you a lesson?" Maya thought for a moment. "He said I would realize what I had lost. He said I would come crawling back to him when I understood that I couldn't handle life on my own." "Did he ever talk about his work as a firefighter? About knowing how to handle emergencies?" "All the time. He was really proud of being a volunteer. He said most people panicked in emergencies, but he knew how to stay calm and take charge." Sarah made more notes. "Did he ever mention anything about body identification procedures? About how difficult it can be to identify fire victims?" Maya's eyes widened as the implication hit her. "You think he knew the body would be hard to identify? You think he planned that?" "We're exploring all possibilities," Sarah said carefully. Jake's phone rang, and he stepped out of the room to answer it. When he returned a few minutes later, his face was grim. "That was the forensics lab. They've had a chance to examine the USB drive we found in the buried box." "What's on it?" Maya asked. "Photos. Dozens of photos of you and Ethan taken over the past several months. Some were taken from outside your house, some from your workplace. There are also recordings of phone calls." Maya felt like she was going to be sick. "He was stalking us?" "It appears so. The photos show Derek had been watching you for months after the breakup. He documented your daily routines, Ethan's school schedule, when you came and went from the house." Sarah reviewed her notes. "Maya, this level of surveillance suggests premeditation. Derek didn't just lose his temper and start a fire. He planned this. But why bury the evidence at the cemetery? Why let us find it?" Jake had been thinking about this question since they discovered the metal box. "I have a theory. What if Derek didn't bury that evidence?" Both women looked at him in confusion. "Think about it. The message said, 'The truth is not buried with the dead.' What if someone else knew what Derek had done and wanted us to find out?" "Who else would know?" Maya asked. "Maybe someone who helped Derek. Or someone who discovered what he did and wanted him to be caught." Sarah stood up and walked to the window. "There's another possibility we need to consider. What if Ethan isn't really dead?" Maya's heart stopped beating for a moment. "What do you mean? If Derek staged the fire and planted a different body in Ethan's room, your son could still be alive somewhere." Maya began crying again, but this time there was hope mixed with the tears. "Do you really think that's possible?" "We won't know until we examine the remains," Sarah said. "But if Derek went to this much trouble to fake Ethan's death, he might have had a plan for keeping him alive." Jake nodded. "It would make sense from Derek's perspective. If he had Ethan hidden somewhere, he could eventually rescue the boy and be the hero who brought your son back to you." Maya was shaking with emotion. "Where would he keep him? Derek lives in a small apartment. He couldn't hide a child there for long." "Derek's a volunteer firefighter," Jake said. "He probably has access to emergency shelters, abandoned buildings, maybe even rural fire stations that aren't used regularly." Sarah returned to the table. "Maya, we need to move fast. If Ethan is alive, he's been without his mother for 3 days. He's probably scared, confused, and possibly not getting proper care." "What do you need me to do?" Maya asked. "First, we need you to think about any properties Derek might have access to. Family cabins, work sites, anywhere he could keep a child hidden." Maya wiped her eyes and tried to focus. "His uncle owns a farm about an hour outside of town. Derek mentioned it a few times, said he used to spend summers there as a kid." Jake was already pulling up information on his phone. "What's the uncle's name?" "Robert Hoffman. The farm is somewhere near Millerville." Sarah called for backup units to be dispatched to the farm location, while Jake contacted the K-9 unit to bring additional search dogs. "Maya," Sarah said, "there's something else we need to discuss. If we're right about this, Derek is going to realize that his plan has fallen apart. That makes him dangerous." "You think he might hurt Ethan?" I think a man who would stage his own girlfriend's child's death to manipulate her is capable of anything. We need to find Ethan before Derek figures out that we're on to him. Rex suddenly stood up and walked over to Maya, placing his head in her lap. The dog seemed to sense that something important was happening. Maya stroked Rex's fur and looked up at Jake. He's the one who found the evidence, isn't he? If Rex hadn't alerted at the cemetery, we might never have known the truth. Jake nodded. Rex has saved a lot of lives over the years. Today might be the most important save of his career. Maya leaned down and whispered to Rex, "If my baby is out there, please help us find him." Rex's tail wagged once, and Jake felt a familiar surge of confidence in his partner's abilities. They had found missing children before, and they would find Ethan Rodriguez. Sarah gathered her files and headed for the door. "Amaya, you're going to stay here with a protective detail while we search for Derek and Ethan. If our theory is right, Derek is going to be looking for you when he realizes his plan has failed." As they prepared to leave the police station, Maya grabbed Sarah's arm. "Detective, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you really believe my son is alive?" Sarah looked at the evidence, at Rex's confident posture, at the timeline that didn't quite add up. Every instinct told her that this case was far from over. "Maya, in 15 years of police work, I've learned that the truth is usually stranger than fiction. Right now, I believe we have a very good chance of bringing Ethan home." As the team mobilized for what could be the most important search and rescue operation of their careers, Maya sat alone in the interview room, alternating between terror and hope. For the first time in 3 days, she allowed herself to imagine holding her son again. Could a mother's intuition about her child's death be the key to saving his life? Meanwhile, 47 miles away in a rundown farmhouse that hadn't seen proper maintenance in years, a small voice called out in the darkness, "Mommy, when is Mommy coming?" Ethan Rodriguez sat on a dirty mattress in what used to be a storage room, his 5-year-old mind struggling to understand why Derek had brought him to this scary place instead of taking him home to his mother. The room smelled like old hay and dampness, and the only light came from a small window covered with boards that had gaps between them. Derek Hoffman paced back and forth in the farmhouse kitchen, his phone pressed against his ear as he tried to reach his Uncle Robert for the 3rd time that day. The phone went straight to voicemail again, and Derek slammed it down on the kitchen counter in frustration. Everything was falling apart. The plan had been simple enough. Start a small fire in Maya's kitchen using the key he had secretly copied months ago. Make sure Maya escaped safely, but create enough smoke and confusion that she wouldn't be able to reach Ethan's room. Plant the burn dummy he had prepared in the child's bed, complete with dental work that would match medical records he had stolen from Ethan's pediatric dentist during one of his stalking sessions. The fire department would find the body, Maya would be devastated and need support, and Derek would be there to comfort her through the loss. Eventually, after months of being her rock during the grieving process, he would find evidence that suggested Ethan might have survived. They would search together, and Derek would miraculously discover the boy in some abandoned location, playing the hero who reunited mother and child. Maya would be so grateful and dependent on him that she would never leave him again. They would be a family, bound together by trauma and Derek's heroic rescue of her son. But Derek hadn't counted on a police dog disrupting the funeral and finding the evidence he had planted. He had buried those items near the grave as part of his long-term plan, intending to discover them months later when he was ready to begin the fake search for Ethan. The items were supposed to be clues that would eventually lead back to this farmhouse, where Derek would have prepared an elaborate rescue scenario. Now the police were investigating before Derek was ready. His carefully orchestrated timeline had been destroyed by a dog's nose and a funeral that turned into a crime scene. Derek walked to the storage room and unlocked the heavy door. Ethan looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. The boy had been asking for his mother constantly since Derek brought him here 3 days ago, and Derek was running out of patience. "Uncle Derek, when can I go home? I miss Mommy, and I want Mr. Bubbles." Derek knelt down beside the mattress, trying to keep his voice calm. "Remember what I told you, buddy. There was a fire at your house, and it's not safe for you to go home yet. I'm keeping you safe until we can find a new place for you and Mommy to live." Ethan's bottom lip trembled. "But why can't I see Mommy? Why can't she come here?" "Because," Derek struggled for an explanation that a 5-year-old would accept. "Because she's in the hospital getting better from the smoke. The doctor said she needs to rest, and she asked me to take care of you until she's all better." It wasn't entirely a lie. Maya had been in the hospital for smoke inhalation, though she had been released the day after the fire. Derek had told Ethan that his mother was hurt worse than she actually was, and that the boy needed to stay hidden to keep both of them safe from the bad people who started the fire. Ethan wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Can I call her? I want to hear Mommy's voice." The doctor said talking on the phone might make her sicker, but I promise, as soon as she's better, you'll see her again. Derek checked his watch. It was getting dark outside, and he needed to drive back to town to find out what the police had discovered at the cemetery. He had left Ethan alone for several hours at a time over the past 3 days, always locking the storage room door and warning the boy not to try to escape or call for help. The farmhouse was isolated enough that Ethan's cries wouldn't be heard by anyone, but Derek had told the child that dangerous people were looking for him, and that leaving the room would put both him and his mother in terrible danger. "I have to go check on your mommy at the hospital," Derek said, standing up. "I'll bring back some more food and maybe a new toy if you're good while I'm gone." Ethan nodded sadly. "Can you bring Mr. Bubbles? I really miss him." Derek felt a stab of guilt. He had used the stuffed elephant as part of his evidence planting, burning it carefully to make it look like it had been rescued from the fire. Mr. Bubbles was now sitting in a police evidence locker, never to be returned to the child who loved him. "I'll see what I can do," Derek lied, locking the door behind him as he left. As Derek drove back toward town, his mind raced through possible escape plans. He could take Ethan and disappear to another state, but that would mean giving up his volunteer firefighter position and his entire life. He could try to accelerate his original plan and stage the rescue earlier than intended, but the police investigation had already progressed too far. Or he could cut his losses and run alone, leaving Ethan at the farmhouse for someone else to find eventually. But that would mean facing murder charges if the boy died of neglect or exposure. Derek pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat in his truck, trying to think. His phone buzzed with a text message from his Uncle Robert. "Derek, the police were asking about you at my farm today. What's going on? Call me." Derek's blood ran cold. The police had already connected him to the farm. That meant they knew Ethan might be alive, and they were closing in on his location. He started the truck and drove back toward the farmhouse as fast as he dared. He had to get Ethan and disappear before the police arrived. There was still time to salvage the situation if he moved quickly. Back at the police station, Detective Chen was coordinating the largest search operation the county had seen in years. K-9 units from 3 neighboring departments had been called in, along with a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging cameras. The farm property was large, with multiple buildings and dense woods that could hide 1,000 secrets. "The uncle claims he hasn't seen Derek in months," Sarah told Jake as they prepared to leave for the farm, but his phone records show multiple calls between them over the past week. Jake was fitting Rex with a tracking collar that would allow the command center to monitor the dog's location during the search. "How many buildings are on the property?" "The main farmhouse, 2 barns, a grain silo, and several smaller outbuildings. Plus there's a creek that runs through the eastern section with some old mining caves that haven't been used in decades." Maya had begged to come along on the search, but Sarah had convinced her to stay at the station for her own safety. If Derek was as unstable as they suspected, encountering Maya during the operation could push him over the edge. The search teams arrived at the farm just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields. Uncle Robert met them at the main gate, a heavy-set man in his 70s with worried eyes and calloused hands. "Officers, I swear I don't know what Derek's been up to," Robert said, leading them toward the house. "He called me last week, asking if he could use the old storage building for some volunteer firefighter training exercises. I said yes, but I haven't seen him since." Sarah exchanged glances with Jake. "Which storage building?" "The one attached to the main house. Used to be where we kept feed and equipment, but it's been empty for years." Jake released Rex from the patrol car and gave him Ethan's scent article, a piece of clothing Maya had provided from the boy's bedroom. Rex immediately put his nose to the ground and began working, his tail high and alert. Within minutes, Rex was pulling Jake toward the farmhouse, his behavior indicating a strong scent trail. The dog led them directly to a side door that accessed what Robert had called the storage building. "That door's always been locked," Robert said, fumbling with a large ring of keys. "I'm not even sure I have the right key anymore." But when they reached the door, they discovered it wasn't locked at all. The heavy deadbolt had been recently oiled, and the door opened easily when Jake turned the handle. Rex immediately began barking, a sharp, excited sound that indicated he had found what he was looking for. The dog ran down a narrow hallway and stopped in front of another door, this one secured with a newer-looking padlock. "Ethan!" Jake called out. "Ethan Rodriguez, are you in there?" From behind the door came a small, frightened voice. "Hello? Is someone there? I want my mommy." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Ethan, this is Detective Chen with the police department. We're here to take you home to your mommy." "Mommy's not sick anymore?" The little voice was filled with hope and confusion. Jake was already working on the padlock with bolt cutters. "Ethan, your mommy is perfectly fine. She's been looking for you everywhere." The padlock snapped, and Jake pulled the door open. Inside the small, dark room, they found Ethan Rodriguez sitting on a dirty mattress, alive, but clearly frightened and malnourished. The boy looked up at them with wide eyes, unsure whether to trust these strangers. "Are you really going to take me to Mommy?" Ethan asked, his small voice breaking. Sarah knelt down beside him and spoke in the gentlest voice she could manage. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to take you home right now." Rex approached Ethan slowly and sat down beside the mattress, his tail wagging gently. The boy reached out and touched the dog's head. "This is a nice doggy," Ethan said, some of the fear leaving his voice. "This is Rex," Jake said. "He's the one who found you. He's a hero dog." As they carefully led Ethan out of the storage room, Uncle Robert stood in shock, staring at the child he hadn't known was being held on his property. "I had no idea," Robert kept repeating. "I swear to you, I had no idea Derek was keeping a child here." Sarah was already on her radio, calling for an ambulance to check Ethan's condition and coordinating with the units back at the station. "Maya, if you can hear this, we found him. We found Ethan, and he's alive." The radio crackled with Maya's voice, choked with tears. "Is he okay? Is my baby okay?" Sarah looked at Ethan, who was now holding Jake's hand and petting Rex with his free hand. The boy was thin and dirty, clearly frightened by his ordeal, but he was walking and talking and seemed physically unharmed. "He's going to be fine," Sarah radioed back. "We're bringing him home." But even as they prepared to transport Ethan back to his mother, Sarah knew their work wasn't finished. Derek Hoffman was still out there, and when he discovered that his hiding place had been found, he would likely become desperate and dangerous. As if summoned by her thoughts, the sound of a truck engine echoed across the farm property. Headlights swept across the farmhouse as a vehicle approached at high speed. Jake immediately positioned himself between Ethan and the approaching truck, while Sarah drew her weapon and called for backup units to converge on their location. Derek's truck skidded to a stop in the farmyard, and Derek himself jumped out, his face wild with panic and rage when he saw the police cars and officers surrounding his hiding place. "You don't understand," Derek shouted, approaching the officers with his hands raised, but his voice desperate. "I was protecting him. I saved Ethan from the fire. I'm the hero here." Sarah kept her weapon trained on Derek while speaking calmly. "Derek, you need to stop right there and get on the ground. Now." "Where's Maya?" Derek demanded, looking around frantically. "I need to talk to Maya. She needs to know that I saved her son." Ethan heard Derek's voice and immediately began crying, pressing closer to Jake for protection. "I want to go home. I don't want to stay with Uncle Derek anymore." The sound of Ethan's frightened cries seemed to break something inside Derek. His face crumpled, and he fell to his knees in the dirt. "I just wanted us to be a family," Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted Maya to need me." Jake carefully picked up Ethan and carried him toward one of the patrol cars, away from Derek's breakdown. Rex followed closely, maintaining his protective position near the child. "It's okay, buddy," Jake said softly to Ethan. "You're safe now. We're going to take you to see your mommy." As Derek was arrested and read his rights, Sarah couldn't help but think about how close they had come to a very different ending. If Rex hadn't alerted at the cemetery, if they hadn't found the buried evidence, if Derek's plan had worked, Ethan Rodriguez would have remained dead to the world, while his mother grieved for a child who was actually alive and terrified just 47 miles away. The ambulance arrived and the paramedics began checking Ethan's vital signs, but the boy kept asking the same question over and over. "When can I see Mommy?" "Very soon," Sarah promised him. "Very, very soon." As they drove back toward town with Ethan safely secured in the ambulance, Sarah radioed ahead to prepare Maya for the reunion she had never dared to hope for. In less than an hour, a mother who had buried her son would hold him in her arms again, and a little boy who had been told his mother was too sick to see him would discover that love had never stopped looking for him. What do you think Maya's first words will be when she sees Ethan alive for the first time in 3 days? Maya Rodriguez stood in the hallway of the police station, her hands shaking so violently that she couldn't hold her phone steady. Detective Chen had called ahead to prepare her for Ethan's arrival, but nothing could have prepared her for the flood of emotions coursing through her body. Joy, relief, anger, disbelief, and overwhelming love all crashed together in waves that left her barely able to breathe. Carmen stood beside her sister, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe he's really alive, Maya! I can't believe we almost buried him!" Maya couldn't speak. 3 days ago, she had watched her son's coffin being lowered toward a grave. She had planned his funeral, picked out flowers, written a eulogy she would never have to give. She had signed papers to cremate what she thought were his remains. The grief had been so overwhelming that she could barely function, barely think, barely exist. Now she was about to hold him again. The automatic doors of the police station slid open, and Maya saw the ambulance pulling into the parking lot. Her legs almost gave out, and Carmen had to steady her with both arms. "Easy, Maya. Take deep breaths. He needs to see you strong." But Maya didn't feel strong. She felt like she was living in a dream, like reality had shifted into something impossible and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Detective Chen appeared beside them, her face showing the exhaustion of the longest day any of them had ever experienced. "Maya, the paramedics checked him over. He's dehydrated and underweight, but he's physically okay. He's been asking for you non-stop since we found him." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. Through the glass doors, she could see Jake Mitchell getting out of his patrol car with Rex beside him. The canine dog that had started this entire chain of events by refusing to let a little boy stay buried under a lie. The ambulance doors opened, and Maya saw her son. Ethan was sitting on the stretcher, his legs dangling over the side, wearing clothes that were too big for him and looking smaller than she remembered. His dark hair was dirty and uncombed, his face was thinner than it should be, but his beautiful brown eyes were exactly the same. "Mommy!" Ethan's voice carried across the parking lot as he spotted her through the glass doors. Maya ran. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life, bursting through the doors and covering the distance to the ambulance in seconds. She scooped Ethan into her arms and held him so tightly that he squeaked in protest. "Ethan, oh my God, Ethan, my baby, my sweet baby," Maya sobbed into his hair, breathing in his scent and feeling his small arms wrap around her neck.
Mommy, I missed you so much. Uncle Derek said you were sick, but I wanted to see you anyway."
Maya pulled back just enough to look at his face, to touch his cheeks, to convince herself that this wasn't a dream. "I'm not sick, baby. I'm not sick at all. And I missed you more than all the stars in the sky." Ethan giggled at their old phrase, the same one Maya had said to him every night before bed since he was a toddler. "More than all the fish in the sea?" "More than all the fish in the sea," Maya confirmed, kissing his forehead, his cheeks, his nose. "More than all the dinosaurs that ever lived?" "More than all the dinosaurs that ever lived." Ethan seemed satisfied with this ritual confirmation of her love. "Mommy, can we go home now? I don't like this place, and I really miss Mr. Bubbles." Maya's heart broke all over again as she remembered the stuffed elephant that was now evidence in Derek's case. "We'll get you a new Mr. Bubbles, okay? The best, biggest, bluest elephant we can find." "But I want my Mr. Bubbles. He has the torn ear that makes him special." Maya looked helplessly at Detective Chen, who approached them with gentle eyes. "Ethan, your old Mr. Bubbles helped the police find you. He's a hero elephant now, so he has to stay with the police for a while. But your mommy's right. We'll find you a new friend." Jake Mitchell walked over with Rex, and Ethan's face lit up when he saw the German Shepherd. "That's the nice doggy who came to see me. Is he coming home with us?" Rex approached slowly and sat down beside the ambulance stretcher, his tail wagging gently. Ethan reached out and patted the dog's head. "Rex is the reason we found you," Jake explained. "He knew something was wrong at the cemetery, and he wouldn't give up until we discovered the truth." Maya looked at Jake with tears in her eyes. "How can I ever thank you? How can I ever thank Rex?" "You don't need to thank us," Jake said quietly. "Just take your son home and love him. That's all the thanks we need." The paramedic approached with a clipboard full of medical forms. "Mrs. Rodriguez, We'd like to take Ethan to the hospital for a more thorough examination. He seems fine, but after what he's been through, it's better to be safe." Maya nodded, still holding Ethan tightly. She wasn't ready to let go of him, even for a few minutes, but she wanted to make sure he was completely healthy. "Can I stay with him?" she asked. "Of course. You're not leaving his side." As they prepared to head to the hospital, Detective Chen pulled Maya aside for a private conversation. "Maya, I need to prepare you for what comes next. Derek will be charged with kidnapping, arson, filing false reports, and several other felonies. There will be a trial, and both you and Ethan will likely need to testify." Maya nodded, her protective instincts already kicking in. "What do I tell Ethan about what Derek did? How do I explain that someone he trusted hurt him like this?" "There are child psychologists who specialize in helping kids process trauma. We'll connect you with the best resources available. But Maya, the most important thing right now is that Ethan is safe and you're together." "Will Derek go to prison?" Maya asked. "Based on the evidence we have, yes, for a very long time." Maya felt a complex mix of emotions about Derek's fate. Part of her was furious that he had put her and Ethan through such hell, but another part of her was just grateful that they had all survived his twisted plan. "Detective Chen," Maya said quietly, "what would have happened if Rex hadn't found that box at the cemetery?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Derek's plan was elaborate and well thought out. If we hadn't discovered the evidence when we did, he probably would have waited several months, then started feeding you clues about Ethan possibly being alive. He would have positioned himself as your support system throughout a fake search, and eventually led you to discover Ethan at the farmhouse. "And I would have been so grateful that I would have stayed with him forever," Maya realized. That was likely his thinking, yes. Maya shuddered at how close Derek had come to succeeding. If Rex hadn't been at the funeral, if the dog hadn't been trained to detect anomalies, if Jake hadn't trusted his partner's instincts. "Mrs. Rodriguez!" The paramedic was ready to transport them to the hospital. Maya climbed into the ambulance with Ethan, settling him on her lap as they began the short drive. Ethan was full of questions about everything that had happened. "Mommy, why did Uncle Derek tell me you were sick?" Maya chose her words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, and they tell lies to try to get what they want. Derek made some terrible choices. "But why did he want to keep me away from you?" "Because he was confused and angry, and he thought if he took you away, I would need him to help me find you." Ethan considered this with the serious expression he always got when trying to understand complicated adult problems. "That's a really dumb plan." Maya couldn't help but smile despite everything. "Yes, baby, it was a very dumb plan." "Is Uncle Derek in trouble now?" "Yes, he's in trouble with the police." "Good," Ethan said with 5-year-old certainty. "He made me scared, and he made you cry. People who make mommies cry should be in trouble." At the hospital, Ethan was given a complete physical examination, while Maya held his hand throughout every test. The doctors confirmed that while he was dehydrated and had lost some weight, he hadn't been seriously harmed during his 3 days in captivity. "He's a resilient little guy," Dr. Martinez told Maya as they prepared discharge papers. "Kids his age are often able to bounce back from traumatic experiences remarkably well, especially when they have strong family support." "What should I watch for?" Maya asked. "Signs that he's having trouble processing what happened? Nightmares, regression in potty training, or other developmental milestones, excessive clinginess, or reluctance to be separated from you?" "But honestly, Mrs. Rodriguez, given what this little boy has been through, I expect him to make a full recovery." As they left the hospital, Maya realized that the sun was rising on what would have been the day after Ethan's funeral. Instead of waking up in an empty house, trying to figure out how to live without her son, she was walking out of a hospital with him, healthy and whole, beside her. Carmen was waiting in the parking lot with fresh clothes for both Maya and Ethan, along with a new stuffed elephant that wasn't quite the same as Mr. Bubbles, but would help Ethan feel secure. "What do you think, Ethan?" Carmen asked, holding up the plush toy. "Should we call him Mr. Bubbles too?" Ethan examined the elephant critically. He doesn't have a torn ear. "Maybe we can make him a special mark so he's unique too," Maya suggested. Ethan nodded approvingly. "Can we go home now? I want to sleep in my own bed." Maya realized with a shock that they couldn't go home. The house had been damaged in the fire Derek had set, and it was still considered a crime scene. Baby, our house needs some fixing before we can live there again. We're going to stay with Aunt Carmen for a while." Ethan accepted this information with the adaptability that children often show in difficult situations. "Can Mr. Bubbles too sleep with me at Aunt Carmen's house?" Of course he can. As they drove to Carmen's house, Maya kept glancing in the rearview mirror to make sure Ethan was really there, really safe, really alive. She still felt like she might wake up and discover this was all an elaborate dream. Ethan fell asleep in his car seat clutching the new elephant, exhausted from the emotional reunion and the hospital visit. Maya watched him sleep and felt overwhelmed by gratitude for Jake Mitchell, Detective Chen, Rex, and everyone who had refused to accept that her son was really dead. Over the following weeks, the truth about Derek's elaborate plan came out in detail during his interrogation and court proceedings. He had spent months preparing for his fake rescue scenario, researching body identification procedures, studying fire investigation techniques, and carefully planning every aspect of his psychological manipulation. The burned dummy he had planted in Ethan's bed was discovered to contain dental work stolen from Ethan's pediatric dentist office, where Derek had broken in months earlier during his stalking phase. He had also stolen medical records, school files, and even some of Ethan's hair from Maya's bathroom to use in creating convincing evidence of the boy's death. Derek's original plan had been to wait 6 months before beginning to plant clues that Ethan might have survived. He would have slowly built hope in Maya's heart, positioning himself as the only person who believed her son could still be alive. The final rescue would have taken place nearly a year after the fake death, giving Derek time to make Ethan dependent on him and confused about reality. Maya testified at Derek's trial, describing the months of controlling behavior and stalking that had preceded the kidnapping. Ethan, with the help of a child psychologist, was able to give testimony about his time at the farmhouse that helped prosecutors understand the full scope of Derek's psychological manipulation. Rex was honored by the police department for his role in solving the case, receiving a special commendation for excellence in detection work. Jake Mitchell was promoted to sergeant, and Detective Chen was assigned to head a new task force focused on missing children cases. But for Maya and Ethan, the most important moment came 6 months later when they moved into a new house with a big backyard and Ethan's own room decorated with superhero posters and a shelf full of books. On their first night in the new house, as Maya tucked Ethan into bed with Mr. Bubbles II, who now sported a carefully stitched battle scar on his ear to make him special, Ethan asked the question that had been on both their minds. "Mommy, are we safe now?" Maya kissed his forehead and smoothed his hair. "Yes, baby, we're safe now. Uncle Derek can never hurt us again, and we have people who love us watching out for us." "Like Officer Jake and Rex?" "Like Officer Jake and Rex, and Aunt Carmen, and all the police officers who helped find you." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mommy, I'm glad Rex found that box at the cemetery." "Me too, baby. Me too. Do you think Rex knew I was alive even when everyone else thought I was dead?" Maya considered the question seriously. "I think Rex knew something was wrong, and he wouldn't give up until he found the truth. Just like how I knew in my heart that something didn't feel right about losing you." "Mothers and dogs are both really smart," Ethan said with sleepy wisdom. "Yes, they are." As Ethan drifted off to sleep, Maya sat beside his bed for a long time, listening to his breathing and marveling at the miracle of having him back. She thought about the cemetery, the funeral that never finished, the metal box that changed everything. She thought about Rex, the German shepherd who had refused to let a lie stay buried. She thought about the power of trusting instincts, even when everyone else thinks you're wrong. And she thought about how sometimes the worst day of your life can become the beginning of something beautiful and new.
Derek Hoffman was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Maya and Ethan never saw him again.
Rex continued working as a search and rescue dog for 3 more years before retiring to live with Jake Mitchell's family, where he spent his golden years being spoiled by children who called him a hero every day. And every year on the anniversary of the day Rex found the buried evidence, Maya and Ethan visited the cemetery with flowers, not to mourn a death, but to celebrate the truth that set them free. In the end, a mother's love, a dog's instincts, and the courage to question what everyone accepted as fact had saved a little boy's life and exposed the darkness hiding behind a familiar face. Some truths are too important to stay buried, no matter how deep someone tries to hide them. What other family secrets do you think might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to dig deeper? Share this incredible story, hit that like button, subscribe for more amazing true stories, and let us know in the comments what you think would have happened if Rex hadn't been at that funeral that day.